Hey everyone, it's Javi here, and in this video we're going to be recreating a basic version of the Spotify home screen. If you happen to be new to my channel, welcome. My name is Javi and I make weekly videos about product design skills, principles, and practices to help you build digital products and bring your ideas to life. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, don't forget to hit subscribe down below because there's a lot more to come. Okay, now that we got acquainted to each other, let me actually switch gears and introduce you to the end result of our work today. So as I mentioned, we're going to be redesigning a very basic version of the Spotify home screen, which looks like this. If you're a heavy Spotify user, you're going to notice this is not the exact design of the Spotify app, even though the interface and the elements of it are the same. But I've taken the liberty to make a few changes in terms of iconography, typography, and colors for the purpose of this video. In order for us to design this together, we're going to be splitting up the work into the three main containers that conform this interface. So the first one is going to be this bottom area right here, where you can see mainly the current song that's playing as well as the music player controls. So you have some here in the center as well as some others on the right side. Once we are done with this, we're going to head over to the left side, which is where we have our navigation. And in this container, you can see that we have a Spotify logo, we have some menu items, we have the names of the playlists that we follow, as well as an install app button. And this is because, by the way, we are designing the web app version of Spotify. And once we're done with this piece, we can drive our attention to the main area of the app, which is where we have some browsing controls, a user profile drop-down button, and then a list of sections with Spotify playlists that are represented in these card components. And while we do all of this, I'm going to be placing special emphasis on a few things, including colors, typography, spacing, the use of components. And at the very end of this video, I'm also going to let you know about a design challenge that you can do and send me in your own time to be featured in an upcoming video. So let's dive right into it. Let me take you to our re-interface design file right here. And here you can see that I have three frames side by side. The first one is actually a screenshot of what Spotify looks like right now when you open it up through the web browser. So that is this. Then right next to it is the final design that we'll have by the end of this video. And next to it is an empty frame where we're going to be doing all the work. So it's worth also pointing out that this design file is loaded up with hero icons that are here in the assets page, as well as text styles, color styles, and effects, all based on Tailwind CSS. So don't worry about this. You can find them in the Figma community. And anyway, I'll be sharing this file with all of you down below as a link. So feel free to duplicate and you'll have all the styles loaded up for you as well, both for this project and any other project that we work on in the future. Okay, so first things first, let's work on recreating this player area right here. So this is just a frame that I called player, and you can see it goes edge to edge on the frame itself, and it has a height of 88. Okay, so let's actually start there. I'm gonna press on this frame here. I'm gonna press my F key and I'm going to create an 88 pixel height right about there. And I'm also going to be manually inputting the width of the frame. I'm gonna center align, bottom align, and define my constraints to left and right and bottom. We're not too worried about responsiveness in this particular video, but I always like to tackle constraints whenever possible. And also, by the way, you may not see the frames here, so I'm just gonna close this one to make sure and put this at the top to make sure that you can see them as much as possible. So, okay, that looks pretty good. Now, let me just rename this from frame 1 to player. So we'll do just that. And just to differentiate it from the rest of the white, let's go ahead and create a divider, which I already have here. This is just a border top that I manually created as a frame. And I'm gonna place it just right at the top of the player frame, nested within, right? So this is just going to be a simple frame with gray 200, right? So any things that are easy to design or don't require much attention, I'm just going to simply drag from the final design, so it's a little bit more dynamic in the video, okay? So, okay, we have this. We can clearly differentiate it, or at least more or less, with this gray 200. And now what we're going to be focusing on is this component right here, this element. So I'm going to put it here so we can see it and recreate it. This is going to actually be a frame that I call left controls. And yeah, we can apply auto layout to this because the placement of the icon here is going to depend on the sizing of the typography. So let's start by just copy pasting this image. So this is just an album cover, simple image here with Drake. And I'm gonna hold my Alt key just to drag this over here. And I believe this has a spacing of 16 on the left here. So I'm pressing onto the layer and holding my Alt key in the keyboard and then just moving my mouse around. And that will give me the relative spacing that this layer has with respect to its parent. So here you can see that we have 16 on the left, 16 top, 16 bottom, perfect composition. So let's go ahead and do the same right here. So yeah, right about there. And you'll also notice that this album has a very light shadow large applied to it. So that's where this very light shadow is coming from. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And by the way, this 16 here, as well as the size of the album and many other things that you're going to see throughout this interface as multiples of 8 or 4, comes from a system for consistency in sizes within an interface called an 8-point or an 8-pixel grid, 4-pixel grid. So more on that later. We'll be seeing multiple examples of that as we go along. Okay, so now between the album and the typography here, the area here with the text, you can see that there's a 12-pixel spacing. So again, multiple of 4. And I'm just gonna type something here. I press my T key and let me just recreate the title of the album here, or in this song, in this case, the song. And I believe we're on the right styling here. So this is going to be a small text, leading 5 font medium. So just a quick look at how this works. Tailwind CSS here nicely has our typography organized in sizes, as well as some of these sizes also have variants with different line heights. That's what leading is. And also the weight of the font. So yeah, this is pretty nice. And this is the style that we wanted. So I'm just going to bring it over 12 pixels next to the album cover. All right. So right underneath it, I'm going to press my Alt key to just duplicate something here below with a 4-pixel distance. And while we're at it, I'm going to change the fill of this to gray 700. Let me see if we did that. Yeah, gray 900 actually, so even a little bit darker. And this one, we're going to want to have it be a secondary text color, which we're going to be using gray 500 for, I believe. That's the one. Yeah. So in terms of hierarchy of information, we don't need the author here to be as relevant as the title of the song. So for the purpose of reducing the importance or the relevance of this layer, we're going to be doing 2 things. We're going to be, or actually 3 things. We're going to be changing the color of the text to have something with a little bit less contrast with respect to the background. So we just did that, changing from gray 900 to gray 500. And then we're also going to be reducing the size of the font from 14 that we have there as our base font size to 12, right? So this is text XS or extra small. And we also don't want it to be medium weight. We're just going to have it be font normal. So there you can appreciate now that this piece of information is much more secondary with respect to the song title. Okay, so we can do a few things now here that we have these 2 layers. I'm going to grab both and do Shift A in order to create an auto layout frame around them. I'm going to call this song info. All right, pretty good. And now I'm going to also press my Shift key again, grab this one and do Shift A to create an auto layout for this as well. So I'm going to call this song, and I'm going to make sure that I come here to my auto layout and I do the center alignment right here. Okay, so that gets us into a good territory here. I think we have everything we needed here. Oh, this one doesn't have spacing actually. So we can come here to this auto layout called song info that we have here and remove the spacing between items from 4 to 0. And that will give us the result that we wanted. Perfect. And I believe now we have this icon, which also has a 12 pixel spacing. So I'm just going to copy paste this heart into here. I'm going to actually, instead of having it loose somewhere in there, I'm going to add it to this auto layout, because if you'll recall, this auto layout has a property of 12 pixel spacing, and that is exactly what we want. So if I just do Command V, it's going to append this item to the end of the auto layout, and that is going to be to the right side here. So we have what we wanted. Perfect. So we finished this element. We have a song element that is an auto layout, and this auto layout has an image. It has an auto layout with the text itself, and it has an icon for the heart here for liking the song, right? So perfect. That is all we wanted. And if you want to test out the auto layout, you can see that everything is working just as expected, which is pretty awesome. Great. So we got through that. Now the next part of the bottom bar here, the player, is going to be the player itself, which once we're done with it, we want to make sure we center in the screen. So how about we take this from this section right here, right? Let's get started with this. For this piece, I actually defined the first component that we need, that we want to reuse across the interface, which is this button here. And it's mostly just like an icon button, because I'm not actually using buttons anywhere other than here and here, which we'll see later. And this could theoretically be some sort of button, but not quite. So I decided to define this. If I click here on the main component, it will take us to this page right here called components, where I have all the components for this interface. And you can see that this is simply an icon that is 16 pixel size, and it just has an auto layout around it. So or not even, it doesn't have an auto layout. It just has a frame around it, and just to make sure it respects some 8 pixel spacing all over, right? So that is basically it. That is all this button component is. And you could theoretically auto layout this if maybe in the future you want to extend this component to, let's say, have like a text next to it or something. That would be perfectly fine. But for the purpose of this video, this is all we need. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to copy paste that component into the frame that we're working on. And all I have to do is right click myself into the icon layer. And because this is hooked up to hero icons on the file itself, we have access to all the hero icons here. Now, I'm not going to bother you with me going through this list and searching for all the icons. So I'm just going to remove this, and I'm going to paste these into display, right? So I'm going to need this one. Okay, that's one. Then there's an 8 pixel spacing. So let's do that. Okay, perfect. Then this one is a special one, right? Because I don't think I was able to find this particular, or is it actually? Yeah, this is also a hero icon, but I made it its own separate component because here these have like 16 pixel size, but I needed this to be just a little bit bigger. So all I did is I grabbed the icon itself in raw, and I just made it, the play button right here. So that seemed quite appropriate. So yeah, that's all this is. It's just an icon from that assets page, but just a little bit bigger. And then here are the icons for the right side. Now, in terms of spacing, you can see that all of these have an 8 pixel distance with respect to each other. You could group these and make an auto layout if, let's say, in the future you want to add another icon and you want it to be very nicely and automatically placed within this row. We're not going to need it for this video, so that'll be mostly fine. And then it's worth noting the colors here. So the play button is a little bit more emphasized because we have this gray 700, other than the button itself just looking a little bit bigger because of the size of the icon. And then the ones here are all gray 500, which come in tone in the same way as the hierarchy that we defined here, with this darker color and then this lighter color to visualize relative importance of the information. So that is what we have here. Okay, I'm going to group these. I'm going to do Command Option or Command Alt G. And now I have a frame that contains all of these elements. If I ever want to auto layout this, as I mentioned before, you can come here and create an auto layout. So yeah, I'm going to call this controls. Pretty good. And now that we got this covered, we can move on to this area right here called the timeline. So this one is also quite simple. I don't think we need to redo it entirely. All this is two frames that are nested to each other. So let me actually show this to you in the layer panel right here. There is a completed section which has a color of gray 400, and then this frame is nested inside this timeline frame which has a color tone of gray 100. Both of these have a border radius of 9,999, which is the maximum value we can give to a border radius here, and that is just to make sure it is like perfectly rounded. And yeah, and then on the left and the right side with some 8 pixel spacing, you have a small text layer here with gray 500 to denote the the progress of the song that's playing, and also how long the song is, so that the user knows more or less how much time is left. So that is all we needed here. I'm just going to copy paste it into view, and between these is an 8 pixel distance, right? So let's just do something like this. Now hold my shift key to have both layers selected and do Command Alt G. And now I have the player section here. Okay, so let me rename this to player. And now I'm going to work on my constraints. So let's do alignment, center, horizontally and vertically. And there we go. Now we have everything we wanted there. The last part for this bottom bar is the right area here that should contain some controls that in Spotify are for, I think, the queue, connecting to other devices, as well as some volume control, right? So let's do that. So this is, I just grabbed like the icons that were nearest to what we needed, just for the purpose of this mockup. And as you can see, this is also quite simple. The bar follows the exact same logic as the bar in the player right here. And right next to it are 3 buttons. As you can see, we're using the exact same component. And those are 3 icons with no spacing in between that contain the volume icon, device icon, and this list icon, which was the closest thing I could get to that custom queue icon for Spotify, from Spotify. So okay, assuming that that makes sense and that this also has a 16 pixel spacing from the right side, we are pretty much done with the first section of this interface, which is the bottom bar with the music player controls. Now that we're done with this area, we can have a look at the left navigation, which is simply a 240 by 812 frame. So let's go ahead and do that first. So 240, left align, top align, and bring it all the way to the bottom. I'm going to set the constraint here to top and bottom, just as a good practice. And instead of frame 1, I'm going to call this navigation. Now I wanted to give the background a bit of a more secondary tone, so I came here to my fill and I set this to gray 100 so that the focus, the attention of the user is going to be more on the content in the main area, which we'll do later, right? So I gave this a gray 100, And within this navigation layer, we have a couple of things. First of all, we have this logo, which is a perfect SVG vector logo that I grabbed from World Vector Logo website. I believe that's what it's called. I'll drop a link in the video description in case you want to check that out. It's a wonderful website with a bunch of nice quality logos from a lot of companies. And that's where I got this Spotify logo from. So that's what we got here, right? We have the Spotify logo. And then for the purpose of defining our navigation, I created a nav item component, which I'll briefly show you, right? So this nav item component has two variants, an active and an inactive state. The active state, all it is the same component with a little bit of a shadow. It's got a white background. I think this one doesn't have a background. So this has a background, and it also has the both the icon and the text layer defined with the green 500 color, which is the closest that I could get with this palette, approximated to the Spotify brand color, right? So that's the active state, and the inactive state is the same, but without the shadow, without the fill, and the icon and the text are set to a gray 500. So our secondary sort of information tone, right? So that sets it also in alignment with how we're defining secondary information across other parts of the interface. So that is good consistency. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this one. I'm going to copy this variant, and I'm going to come back to our design, and we're just going to start placing some of them here. So let's go ahead and just set it right over there, 20. And as you can see, this already has some constraints left and right. And I can change this text to home. Right underneath home, we're going to want to have a couple more instances for our different nav items. So all I have to do is hold my Option Alt key and just put one right underneath there. I can hit the toggle here of the component to set it to inactive. And what I would do is I would change the text to search, and then just go through the hero icons library to also get the icon here, as well as this one for your library. So now that we know how to do that, all I'm going to do is actually just replace this, and also let you know that, or show you that this is an auto layout, right? So this is set to left and right. The inner components of the auto layout also have fill container. That is what makes the left and right possible. So if you ever need to, for example, say, okay, we think that the left navigation should be wider, then this is going to be adjusting accordingly, right? So that's what those constraints are for. And it's as simple as that. And also, if you ever want to add additional things to the navigation here, you can just Command C, Command V, and because of the auto layout, it's just going to magically come into place. So that is pretty handy. Okay, so we got this one, and this one is the exact same. It's just that here we applied some spacing because of the information architecture design of this app. These are two elements that are more related to each other than they are to the other navigation items right here. So this has to do with sort of your content, like creating your playlists, your liked songs, and these are sort of more like generic, navigation items like home, search, your library. So that's why these two sections are a little bit differentiated. And underneath that, we have a divider, which I did in the same fashion as the one that I did for the bottom bar. So you know how to do that one, right? So I'm just going to copy paste. And again, as you can see, we are applying our 8 pixel grid, right? So 24 on the sides, 8 on the top. This one as well has 8 pixels on the sides. This has 24, which is the same or very close to this one being 20, and so on, right? So there we go. We have that. And then this one is just going to be, I just coined this as the playlist nav item component. Didn't actually make it a component, but it could be. This is just going to be a simple 32 pixel height frame, right? And inside is going to be a text called Welcome to Premium, which is the playlist that I am assigned to when I created an account in Spotify. Now, you might be wondering, hold on a second, we're doing this whole 8-pixel grid thing all over the place. And now you show me a text layer that inside has 6 pixels with respect to top and bottom of the frame. Why is that? And the answer to that is that, well, there's 2 ways to go about it, really. And I see this being differently applied depending on the component sometimes, but also just depending on the product and the preference of the design team. Either in this case, you define that you want the, let's say the nav item itself, the container itself, to respect an 8-pixel or a 4-pixel grid, or you want the inner element spacing to do that, right? So you can't always have both. Most usually you cannot have both. So in this case, you could say, maybe this whole thing should have 2 more pixels top and bottom. So it's a perfect sort of 8-pixel spacing, but then the container itself would not be 32 pixels, right? So in this case, Spotify prioritized having the 8-pixel grid being respected at the frame level. And that has some benefits in terms of making it easier to combine frames like that, because they're all going to be respecting that grid. And then it just brings like a little bit of inconsistency, or not even inconsistency, but you just have to know that there's going to be cases where your inner spacings are not going to be respecting that grid or those values, and you'll just have to learn to be okay with it, right? So that's what's going on here. Okay, so we did that, and now the last piece is this install app button, which I actually use the same nav item component for, because all this is a navigation item that has an icon and a piece of text. So I decided to reuse what we already have rather than create a component out of it. However, this might not be best practice down the line, right? Because maybe the interaction design of the component is different, or you would argue this is not quite something that is a navigation item, because navigation items should take you to a page or something like that, and this is actually like a call to action to something very specific that is not navigation related. And so you could argue, okay, this should be already a button component that happens to be used here. So that is something that you might think about, but for the purpose of this video, I just chose to reuse what we have. So having that said, as you can see, we finished our left navigation here. So we have 2 areas, and we have 1 more to go, which is the main area of the Spotify app. Now that we have that in place, let's head over to the final design to see what this looks like in depth. The first part of the main area is going to be this navigation section right here. And I coined it as a navigation frame because it does have these browsing controls here on the left side, as well as this user drop-down menu, which also helps the user enter different parts of the app, such as the profile, the settings, and so on. So it is kind of like a top nav. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy paste this outside of the frame so we can do it one part at a time. So here comes the reason why. First of all, I defined this to be a component called browsing button because I had to, we naturally have to reuse this twice to have left and right control. And I didn't use what we had before. As you know, we have this button, which is pretty much an icon with some spacing around it. And I didn't use it because the icon size itself is too small, right? So even though I don't know if it is actually the same height, 32, yeah, it's actually the same height for the layer itself, but it is the entire icon, and then it has a 5-pixel spacing with respect to the frame rather than 8, which is what we had before. So this browsing button here is just another simple component, and I didn't define variants for it, even though I could have like a left and right, disable, enable. But just for the purpose of this video, all I did is define it right here and then reuse it twice to create this top nav browsing buttons auto layout frame. So all I'm gonna do is actually, let's just already copy paste one of the instances of this right here, just to show you that all we have here is a frame that has some 32 spacing with respect to the left and right, 16 pixel with respect to the top, so being very mindful of our grid. And then this area right here is just an auto layout frame with the 2 browsing button instances. The first one is going to be the browsing button just with a 50% opacity, just to let you know that this is a disabled state. So, because you're in the home screen, you cannot go anywhere back because there's nowhere back you can go to. And on the right side is the same button, but all I did is I changed the icon from the chevron left to the chevron right. And that gives me this right here. The spacing in between is 16 pixels, which is usually a little bit more than what you would see as, for example, spacing here. And that is in order to make it very easy for the user not to miss the navigation here. So it's really hard if I go to zoom to 100%, which I did, by the way, by doing Command 0, it takes you to that zoom of what the user would see in the screen at this distance. It is quite differentiated, like there is quite some spacing, and that is on purpose to ease navigation between pages. Okay, so we got that in place. Now we can talk about this user button right here, which you can't appreciate here because it has the same tone in the background, but this actually does have a background of gray 100. And it's worth mentioning that this is an auto layout as well, right? So this is called user. It's an auto layout. You can see it's got some funky spacing here. It's got 2, 2, 2 on the top left and bottom, and that is because the height of this button itself is being more or less determined by this avatar right here. So this is an avatar component as well, which I just defined here because you're probably gonna need it for other parts of the design in the future, maybe where you're gonna want to have a user avatar. And yeah, so this is a 28 by 28 because when you add the top and bottom, it adds up to being 32. So we are respecting our 8 pixel grid, right? And with respect to the difference between the elements, we have 8 pixels, right? So we have 8 pixels between the avatar and the text, and then we have 8 pixels between the text and this icon right here, which is a chevron down, right? So that's pretty much it. And then the text itself is gray 900, both the text and the icon. And the background of the button is gray 100 to make it a little bit differentiated from the background of the main area. So that is all we have here. And what we can do now is just drag it into this frame, into the top nav frame, and I'm going to right align it with respect to it. So it will sit at 32 pixel spacing with respect to the main content area. And just by doing that, you can see that we already have that part right there. Perfect. Now that we have that in place, we can go to the remaining of the main content area, which is where luckily we can do a lot of reusability through components. So if we head over to the finished version here, you can appreciate that there are 2 components that we can reuse across this remaining work. The first one is the section titles, right? So if you haven't noticed, the title text here, both the size of the text, the color of the text, the weight, they are the same no matter whether the section has this subtitle or not, right? So this is just an addition for one of the variants of this component. And also it's got also this see all, right? In this subtitle section right here. So what I did is I defined a section title component that all it has is a variant for whether there is a subtitle or not, okay? And within the subtitle, I didn't just add text, I also made it a frame. And that is because I wanted to be able to create a frame within within this section right here so that I could add freely this see all, right? And this see all is appropriate mostly for these sections right here with a bunch of playlists where Spotify will show you, let's say, like 6 or 8 of them, and then you can click on see all to go to a dedicated page for, let's say, chill playlist, right? So that is pretty good. And what would happen if we did not have this frame, as you would see? So if I do Command Shift G, you will see that it's just going to make the see all respect the auto layout, which I did not want. I want these two to be on the same line. So in order for me to do that, the option that I had was to grab them, do Command Option G to create a frame, and then bring that frame to be not fixed width, but rather fill container. So now I have that, and you can see that this moved around because it already has some constraints applied. So yeah, that is all, right? So all I have to do actually here is then resize this frame to, let's say, over there, and bring this to be, I think, bottom aligned. And that is how we get to the end result that I have before, right? So I'm just going to Command Z myself back to what we have, and you'll notice that it is the exact same thing. So that is how we get here, right? And the reason of why we have a nested frame inside that auto layout. And then we have this variant, which just doesn't have that. And it's just simply a title, right? So that gives us one part of the reusability. While we're here, I will also talk to you about this one right here, this card. This is the card that we are reutilizing to showcase like all the different playlists that conform this version of the home screen, right? So all this is an auto layout frame. It's got 16 pixel spacing between the items, and it also has 16 pixel padding on the sides. So if I hover over here, it's 16, here it's 16, and here it's 16 as well. Now, between this one and that one, there is a 4 pixel spacing. So that is why I defined here a nested auto layout called text. Because again, if I didn't have this frame defined, I just do Command Shift G, then you will see that it's going to force everything within the auto layout to adhere to the 16 pixel spacing between elements, and I don't want that. So what I had to do is I had to define an additional auto layout that has its own spacing property between items, so that I could freely define what this looks like. And in this case, you can see that we have a very bold title here, which would be the title of the playlist. And that is defined with a font bold text base. And then right underneath that is a text small normal weight with gray 500. So again, similar logic in terms of how we define hierarchy of information through a mix of different typographic skills, right, or typographic traits. So that is a pretty good revision of that. So now that you have a good understanding of how this works, how this component is designed, by the way, these all have the appropriate resizing in case that you want to have a component that is going to be reusable across different widths. So that is defined there for you. Now we can go ahead and just recreate this very easily just with those two components. So first thing we need is a section title. So I'm just going to copy paste this because it's rather simple. It's going to follow the same 32 pixels on the sides. And then with respect to the top nav, it's going to be 24. And as you can see, it's just a section title with the text that says recently played, and it doesn't have a subtitle, right? Right underneath that is our card component, which is just the base variant that we have. So we can have it just like that with 24 pixel spacing with respect to the section title. And then underneath that, we're going to have one of our sections with a more complex section that is going to have a section title with a subtitle. So all I did is I added an instance of that component right here, changed the typography to these things right here, and that's pretty much it, right? So same sizing, same spacing with respect to left and right, and here it's 32. And then right underneath that, I define this. So what you're seeing here is an auto layout. of card components. So I took a bunch of card components, I put them next to each other, or rather like the first two, and between those two is a 24 pixel spacing, right? So that is what I did here. I put these two and then I defined them as an auto layout, right? So if I were to recreate this, let's say, I would just have these two. I would put them right here. I think this might just be 24, is it? 16, so it's closer. 16 pixel spacing with respect to the section title. And I have these two cards, they're not grouped yet. All I have to do is do Shift A to define an auto layout. I'm gonna call this cards carousel of sorts. And then all I have to do is press the last one here, Command C, Command V, and as you can see, it goes on forever. So all I have to do is I'm just gonna grab these ones that I already defined for myself here with different text and images, and I'm gonna come here and just copy paste them, and there we go, we have it. So you can see that this one actually, I designed it to go a little bit of an overflow, which Spotify doesn't actually have. And I did this so that I wouldn't really complicate too much the grid of the items here, and like doing too many like typography or like frame adjustments for the spacing and the sizing. So I think I feel like quite comfortable just having like a bit of an overflow, which is kind of a cool sort of mobile pattern. And it doesn't look bad either, right? So that's how I got away with that, and avoiding like having to have this like perfect spacing between elements. So that is pretty much it, because we don't have that much more space to define further elements of the screen. So yeah, it's worth noting. Let's see, what else am I missing here? It's worth noting this has like the 4 pixel corner radius for both the card, and the artwork here is a 2 pixel border radius. And then the card itself, in order to have a little bit more of a contrast with respect to the background, it's got also a very, very dimmed, very slight gray 50 tone, right? So that is pretty much it. So now if we compare these two, I think you will notice that we just finalized our Spotify reinterface. We have everything we wanted in order to achieve this design. And before we call it a day, I just wanted to point out that in an upcoming video, I'll be also introducing interaction design to the components that we defined in the work that we did today. So if we are browsing through, for example, Spotify right now, you can see that things like the left navigation components have a little bit of an interaction. The music player controls have some interaction to make those elements pop a little bit more as you hover over them. And also the cards, they have this very nice interaction design on hover that showcases this play button to easily play any playlist through the home screen. So that is going to be quite nice. And if you want to be featured in that video, I recommend you to take the work that we did on our own within this video and see if you can come up with something by then. Just share with me privately, and if it's pretty cool, then I'll introduce it in the upcoming video as well before we work on it together. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you found the content and the format of this video useful. If you did, please let me know by giving it a big like, and subscribe to my channel for more videos that are coming soon. Stay tuned until then, and I'll catch you in the next one.